I think, at least from my own somewhat limited studies, most religions, philosophies tend to tell us how we should be. And if we have faith, confidence in those teachings, then we set out on a path to try to become the kind of person that we think we should be. Unfortunately, most of these teachings that sketch out a picture of the kind of person that we should be tend to be somewhat deficient in detailing all the steps needed to take us from where we are now to where we should be. The result is that many people carry around with them a sense of guilt and inadequacy because they're not able to live up to the ideals that they have adopted through faith. Now in Buddhism, the Buddha began with an analysis, a presentation of the way things are, not the way things should be. And he encouraged us to look at our own experience and ask ourselves whether we can recognize the patterns and the habits and the nature of our existence as represented in the Buddha's teachings. So, in other words, does it make sense? The Buddha says that we suffer unnecessarily in life because we lack a clear perception, a clear vision of the way our bodies and minds work. So this is not for a teaching that we are expected to accept easily, but we are presented with certain challenging hypotheses which we use to look at our life. And the extent to which we discover that the Buddha's analysis expresses eloquently our own experience, to that extent faith arises. The word Buddha, as I'm sure many of you will know, is derived from the word meaning awake. So the Buddha was the one who was awakened, who is awake. And the Buddha's enlightenment was the enlightenment of a human being, a very special human being in many ways, but nevertheless a human being for all that. And through his awakening, he became Buddha, the Buddha, after which time it would not really be accurate to refer to him as a human being anymore, although externally he would not have changed appreciably through his enlightenment. The Buddha became enlightened as a representative of the human race, proving the human capacity for enlightenment. So, belief in Buddhism is not restricted to things that we can prove through our own meditation practice, for instance, in every case. The event that took place in particular 2,500 more years ago in Bodh Gaya in India is not something that we can test for historical accuracy. But that is not a serious issue for us as Buddhists, because the essential element of our faith is not in the particular events, circumstances of the Buddha's life so much as what they represent to us. So belief in that the Buddha was truly enlightened, that there is such a thing as enlightenment, leads on to a belief in the human potential for enlightenment, and then most importantly, from there to belief in our own capacity for enlightenment, whether we are male or female, European, Asian, African. Being born as a human being means that we have all that is needed to realize enlightenment. And that is the basis upon which we approach the Buddha's teaching, that confidence in our own ability to abandon all that is unwholesome or negative, to cultivate all that is positive, noble and good, and the ability to free ourselves from all suffering and its cause, defilement. So the Buddha is telling us that as human beings we have a wonderful capacity, and the Buddha on many occasions said that being born in the human realm is incredibly difficult, and to be reborn in the human realm and have contact and ability to study and practice the Buddha's teachings is even more difficult to achieve. But that capacity for freedom, inner freedom, enlightenment is an inheritance, if you like. It is a capacity, but only one that will be realized through a systematic education of every aspect of our lives, an education of the way that we relate to the physical world, an education of the way we relate to the social world, an education of emotion, an education of our thinking and our wisdom faculty. And this education, which is usually spoken of in terms of the Eightfold Path, or sometimes in its shortened, abbreviated form as the Threefold Training, or sometimes the 4 kinds of bhavana or cultivation, is something that we all must take responsibility for ourselves. And yet our ability to take responsibility for ourselves, to do the work necessary to become a refuge to ourselves is greatly dependent on the access to good friends, good spiritual friendship, teachers. So although the Theravada school of Buddhism stresses self-reliance a great deal, it is balanced by an emphasis on supportive, nourishing spiritual relationships, and the effort to cultivate good friends and to become a good friend is central to Buddhist teachings. So in Theravada Buddhist teaching, we don't have the idea of the guru in the same way that we may find in Tibetan Vajrayana tradition, for instance. But here the teacher is the ultimate good friend. The qualities of the good friend, the teacher as good friend, that he's someone who inspires affection, someone who inspires respect, someone who inspires the desire to emulate them, to follow them in their practice. The teacher as good friend is one who is endlessly patient with the foibles and weaknesses of his students or her students. Someone who is able to communicate well, who knows how to speak with different people and different groups of people in the most effective way. He or she is a good communicator, and especially someone who is able to explain the most profound topics in the most simple and direct way possible. So, a side note here that simplicity of presentation and the ability to speak in a way easily understandable is much praised these days, but that there must always be the reservation that things should not be simple for simple sake. In other words, simple to the extent that one is glossing over or avoiding things which are difficult to understand. So it must be a simplicity which accurately and completely represents the complex. Lastly, the teacher is someone who never misleads, takes advantage of, manipulates students in any way. So these are the qualities of the teacher as good friend. So we realize this is work that we have to do, but alone. But it's work we do alone with others, and the practicing alone and practicing in a group have different things to offer. I myself, in my monastic career of after 30, 40 years, have spent many years in community and many years in solitude, and also observed the practice of many others. And my conclusions are that neither is necessarily superior to the other, that the advantage of being alone or being able to decide on your practice, the style of practice, and the time you devote to different kind of practices gives you a continuity and an ability to go deeper than might be possible in a community in which you have various responsibilities to honor. But the solitary life is one of extremes, in the sense that if the practice is going very well, then you don't have anything to distract you from it. But the obverse is true, and that if the practice is going poorly, you don't have the support from those around you to pull you up and to help you out. This is why before monastics are allowed to or permitted to go off by themselves, they do a reasonably long period, usually 5 years, which they are mainly living in community. Because in community you have that support that maybe you don't go so high but you don't go so low, and you attain a stability of practice. But also in community you experience a very useful kind of discomfort. And that's the discomfort of living with people who have different ideas, different views, not, of course, in the major matters of practice, but in smaller everyday matters, and people who have a different idea of who you are than you have. And so there's a constant friction living in any kind of community, even a spiritual community. And for one on the path of practice, of awakening, that is not a bad thing. On the contrary, because any kind of mental discomfort, as opposed to physical discomfort, is always and in every case bound up with some inner defilement of mind or inner toxic mental state. So whenever we have that sense of frustration and irritation and stress and so on and so forth that comes through living in community, as a practitioner of the Dhamma, we recognize this is a joint production. You know, we're not just blaming ourselves and saying, oh, we shouldn't be like this, because then we're back into that old model of leading a spiritual life in order to become a special kind of person. You know, the moment you start getting onto that track, I should be kinder, I'm a Buddhist, I should be kind, I should be able to forgive, but I can't, therefore I'm bad, or I shouldn't feel so much greed for this or for that, it's bad, I'm bad, it's bad, therefore I'm bad. This is the logic of wrong view, as we call it in Buddhism. So now we're interested in awakening, following the Buddha's path of awakening to the things, the way things are, and learning from experience. And so this constant kind of friction and emotion that's coming up is exactly the point. You know, this is where the practice lies. My teacher, Ajahn used to say, you know, when people get upset at home and have problems, and they come to the monastery and want to go on retreat for a while, and it's not that that's bad thing necessarily. It may be a very good thing, but the thing that always to remember is that it's like your house is on fire. Where are you going to tip the water? And you tip the water where the fire is, and that's where you have to do the work, and it's not somewhere else or in running away from that. But you need the tools, the presence of mind, the clarity of mind, to be able to deal with fires sometimes, and so a period of retreat can be a wise option in that case, but it's not the answer. The answer is learning how to deal with the fires that arise, and recognizing that we need to go beyond a praise and blame or right and wrong model of conflicts, and looking at patterns of contribution. Whenever there's any kind of conflict, there's what I call a pattern of contribution. And the contribution might be coming 70-80% from one side, and only a small percentage from the other side, but there always has to be a contribution from both sides for any conflict. So learning to map that contribution, having sufficient clarity of mind, being able to put down all the hurt thoughts and emotions and looking at the contribution. And then, for instance, we can see if someone has been behaving very badly or speaking badly, then that bad behavior, that unkind, selfish behavior is not to be condoned or overlooked. And similarly, hurtful, abusive speech. But we need to separate that from the suffering that arises in our minds when we are faced with that, because that is not a necessary result of being the object of unkind actions or speech. There's no fixed relationship between somebody else's actions and your mental state. This is where the possibility for inner freedom becomes apparent. Because when somebody acts badly, speaks badly to us, towards us, then the most upsetting element is this sense, it shouldn't be like that. He or she shouldn't act like that, shouldn't speak like that. We have an idea of how things should be and are hurt, outraged, depressed at the difference, at the gap, the yawning gap between how things are and how things and how we would like things to be, or how we think things should be. But recognizing that things are this way because of various causes and conditions, both within us, within the other person, in the environment, and being able to let go of all the thoughts and emotion, and awakening to the pattern of contribution. Now, it needs to be emphasized that Buddhism is not saying you should just be at peace with whatever happens. If you're suffering, it's your fault, therefore, meditate and do something about that. This is not a passive teaching where you just put up with whatever's going on. But the Buddha is teaching us to make our mind clear enough that we can step out of that whole sense of self and he hurt me, she abused me, he showed contempt for me, he has no concern for my feelings, all that kind of whirlpool of negative thinking, and finding a refuge in the calm of the mind, and then being able to map the contributions to the present situation. And that might require us to confront that person, or even to end relationship with that person, or it might not. But the Buddha's teaching is the clearer your mind, the better decisions that you will make. So, when people come to monks, sometimes they want monks to make important decisions for them, giving out of respect for your wisdom or your spiritual authority. But this happens to me quite a lot, and what I will generally say to people is, this is not a decision for me to make, it's your decision, but you're only going to make a good decision if you can clear your mind, and you have to put that work into developing the mindfulness and the clarity of mind in which you can make the best possible decision for you and then take responsibility for it. So the Buddha's teaching is that morality, ethics, our ability to make good decisions, wise decisions, should not come from a particular philosophy, even a Buddhist philosophy, but that our first effort should be to be creating the conditions, particularly the inner conditions, in which we can make a good choice and in which we can recognize the way things are. Because the Buddha taught us that morality in a Buddhist sense are those kinds of agreements, that standards that we adopt in our communities in such a way that our conduct is in harmony, reflects the way things are. So for those of you familiar with these terms, we have a word of Satya Dhamma and Jariya Dhamma, or Satya Tham and Jariya Tham. So Jariya Tham or Jariya Dhamma are all those conventions, laws, customs, agreements, regulations which accurately map onto the way things are. So the more that you're in harmony with the way things are, the more your conduct reflects that. And so this is one of the reasons why one of the traditional words used to express the concept of morality in Buddhism is the Thai word bokati. It's the norm. It's just a normal and natural way of expressing your understanding of the way things are. I'll give you an example here. Sense of gratitude. You know, everybody, I think, recognizes that as a virtue. But it's not something you can tell yourself to be. You should be grateful. You know, so you have children open their presents on Christmas, you know, and they sort of pull this miserable face, and you say, you should be grateful, or you say, it's the thought that counts. And it's this idea that you can bully someone into being grateful, or you should be a grateful person. But my experience, and I would suggest for many people, is when you start to meditate and you start looking at your mind more closely, then all kinds of new thoughts bubble up into the mind. And for me, when I was first meditating, on a daily basis for a number of hours every day, and before I became a monk, and I was living in India as a teenager, the things that really came up most strongly and completely unexpectedly were the sense of gratitude to my parents for all that they provided for me, both the physical support and, of course, and also mental, emotional support, and something that I'd taken for granted. And if there's any indicator that meditation is doing you some good in your life, or you're starting to get some benefit from it, I don't think that you should measure it in terms of some kind of special, peaceful, blissful, spiritual states of mind, but that you start to recognize, re-question, awaken to so many of the most basic things that you've always taken for granted in your life. So you're through this effort to keep putting down this delight and indulgence in passing mental states, you begin to see more clearly just what's going on, getting away from the content of mental states and seeing the process of mental states. This gives the mind a spaciousness and an ease and things start to arise very naturally, gradually. And this, for me, as I say, it was an awareness of just how, to what extent I'd taken the kindness and the support of my family for granted. I left home when I was 17 and, would have quite happy never to go back again. I was just exulting in being out of the home. And it was over a year before, I really looked at that whole sense of constriction and being in prison and resentment to my family in a whole new light. And I think that if you start looking at your mind and seeing both the negative and the positive mental states and things that are going on, then it's hard for me to see how you could sustain that kind of conceited, aggressive conceit and self-belief, very blind self-belief that so many people carry around with them. And so it's not that humbleness is something that you should be humble, but when you see how much you owe to others, then humility arises naturally. So humility, sense of gratitude, so many of these beautiful, noble qualities of mind are not produced by some kind of project to develop them as such, as that they are the natural outcomes, inevitable outcomes of inner awareness, this awakening to the way things are. And so as we look more closely and observing what's going on very minutely, then the relationship between our actions and our emotions or our mental states becomes more clearly. We realize when we act in certain ways, we speak in certain ways, it makes us very agitated, makes us full of regret, increases sense of self-aversion, lack of self-respect, and so on, leads to all kinds of negative results, including an unwillingness to be with ourselves. When we behave badly, the last person we want to spend time with is ourselves. And so when you're in that behaving unwisely, unskillfully period, you don't want to meditate because you don't want to come face to face with the consequences, emotional consequences of your actions. So this is why developing meditation practice and that habit of inner observation is so important and something to be sustained. And because then that care in the way that you behave and the way that you act becomes just a natural outcome of this wise understanding and observation of the way in which unkind, unwholesome action creates suffering and problems both for ourselves and those around us. So this is a practice of learning to wake up. And the Buddha says that the more we wake up, the wiser we become, and the wiser we become, then the more that affects our life in the world, whether we're a monastic or a lay person. So this is the fundamental principle. It's not adoption of Buddhist beliefs and principles and trying to be a special person in any way, but putting that constant effort into awakening to what's going on right now. Often, you get to you're traveling somewhere and you get there and you realize you're kind of stressed out or irritable and you don't quite know why. But if you observe, then let's say on the whole of a journey, you've had this kind of low level resistance to and dislike of feeling hot, feeling sweaty, or loud music from a speaker somewhere in a train or in a taxi or something. And so there's this without that observation and awakening to what's going on right now, then there's this very low-level accumulation of negative mental states, but at such a level that it rarely reaches that intensity that really imposes itself upon us. So mindfulness is not simply a practice of being here now. Mindfulness is embedded within the Eightfold Path, and there is a moral and ethical dimension to it, a sense of recognizing what mental states are harmful and preventing them from taking over the mind, and also the mindfulness of those mental states which are nourishing to the mind and which may be taken up and cultivated. So the effort is to care for the mind, care for the body, care for speech, and to deal with negative mental states that arise in the most effective, compassionate way, and also to constantly be seeking to develop, to cultivate wholesome mental states. And that, the heart of that is this effort to observe, to see what happens when somebody praises us, what happens when somebody treats us unfairly or criticizes us unfairly, rather than simply enjoying the praise or feeling hurt by the criticism or trying to get away from the criticism. Then we see this as a teaching moment. This is awareness of we can really see what's going on in our mind and see the need to care for the mind and to train the mind and educate the mind. So when we have this sense of ourselves as a student of life, as it were, then this tendency that we have to discriminate as good and bad in terms of I like this and I don't like this, and I like this, therefore it's good, I don't like this, therefore it's bad, which sounds very childish, but which often underlies our reaction to experiences. Then we're looking to find ways of revealing and dealing skillfully with unwholesome mental states, and to plant and to cultivate positive mental states throughout the day. So I think I've spoken enough for this morning. I'd like to end the talk at this point.
So from now on, we have about 20 minutes, and it's a chance for you to ask a question to Ajahn. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and volunteers will bring the microphone to you.
My humble greetings to Ajahn Jayasaro. My name is Tripur, and I'm a student at Dhamma University. I just have some question in my mind that I have been practicing meditation recently, almost regularly, but my parents are really concerned about my practice. They do not meditate, and when I talk about meditation, they say that we are never going to meditate. So they are really concerned about my practice, and it sometimes concerns me. And my intention is that I would like to get deeper and do more meditation practice to understand more about the teachings. But the kind of reaction that I get from my parents sometimes makes me feel like maybe I'm not able to make them understand it. So what can I do about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed this real shift in this country, particularly from when I was first teaching. A lot of people will come and say, how can I get my kids to be interested in meditation? They're not interested at all. And then over the past 10 years or so, now it's all people complaining about their parents or asking, not complaining necessarily, but how can I get my parents to meditate? And so there was, a period in Thailand, particularly like 30, 40 years ago, when this Western inspired development and all the ideas and values associated with it just sort of swept through this country. And I remember being really shocked when I came, the number of people who would ask, if you meditate, will you go crazy? This was like a major fear of people, like middle-class urban people in Bangkok, who this idea that meditation will make you go crazy. And I don't know, maybe there was one person, it was in the newspapers or something, and people, I don't know exactly how that came about. In reply to your question, I would say, talking with anybody, try to start from where they're at rather than from where you're at, and that's a good way in. I mean, one way I've talked to people about it is look at the world and look at the corruption and the greed and the hatred and the jealousy and all these things that we see in the world around us. Is it always going to be like this? Does it have to be like this? Is there anything that we can do? Or what's our responsibility as a human being living in a society where the forces of greed and selfishness and so on are so strong? And is there any systematic means of reducing the amount of greed and hatred and jealousy and so on and so forth, and anxiety and depression and all these things in the human mind? I would say that yes, there is, that the Eightfold Path laid down by the Buddha is an extremely effective way. What we call meditation is one element of that Eightfold Path. Meditation as such is not a panacea, it's not like a magic cure. It has to be embedded within the whole body of the Buddha's teachings to be really effective in the way that the Buddha taught. If meditation is just taken out of its context, it can just be like a stress reduction technique, which is, if that's all somebody wants from it, that's fine. But in terms of Buddhist idea, that's very reductionist idea. But if you can tell your parents that this is a way of understanding myself and being able to deal with the greed, the hatred, the anxieties, the fears, and all the mental states within me that cause me to suffer, and that it's for me it seems a very rational and effective way of realizing some happiness in this crazy world. And I think, of course, your parents, they want you to be happy. They don't want you to suffer. So if you're able to explain to them exactly why you think that meditation will reduce the amount of suffering in your life and the amount of suffering you cause for others, and increase the amount of happiness in your life and the amount of happiness that you have to share with others, then I think that might be one way of approaching it. Also, the old adage that actions are louder than words, and often if someone is practicing as a Buddhist or meditating, people around you start to notice. You should the more kinder and sensitive to others, more integrity, more patience, these kinds of things people pick up on and notice, and they're the proof of the pudding. They're the proof that this is something that's worthwhile giving time to. But it's also try to be to recognize specifically what your parents' fears are. Are there fears that if you meditate, you'll just become this kind of totally spiritual being, and you won't want to work, and you won't want to fulfill your responsibilities to your family or to society? Or you're afraid it's going to be like a cult, and you become kind of weird. So you have to be able to also to try to identify the specific fears and anxieties they have, and to answer each specific anxiety as best you can.
May I ask Ajahn Jayasaro? I'm from Ubon Ratchathani. I'm a good practitioner and a beginner from meditation, but I don't have much time to go to the temple. I will do it during weekends or holidays when I go back to visit my parents. I have been told by some good friends that you should have a good teacher to teach you how to meditate, and this is a good way or the gateway to learn how to be awakening. But when I feel something frustrating on myself or on my mind, or being treated unwise or bad behavior by my colleagues, I know how to learn to let it go. It's not so easy to do that, but in the end, I learned how to stop that frustrating emotion, and I let it go. So this is this is a good way to be a beginner of being meditation, or should I have to find out a good teacher to do meditation as a practice and a gateway to be awakening? Thank you.
Yes, I think when you first begin meditation, if it's possible to take some time off and go on a meditation retreat or a course, that's very good to just to leave your surroundings and your responsibilities, and just devote yourself to meditation for a number of days, because first off you get a confidence with the technique and meditation practice. You have some opportunity for asking questions, and also you develop a little self-confidence, because you see, I can do this, even there is some improvement that you can see. If your meditation is reaching quite a high level, then you need more contact with a teacher. But for most people practicing in daily life, it's enough to if you're meditating every day and you have some questions, to go to see a teacher once a month or something like this is probably enough. You don't need to be living in the same monastery or in the same place. And don't forget that we're now living in the most privileged, fortunate era. You have access to teachings that Buddhists have never had in the past. You can on your iPod you can choose between arahants, and you can turn them off when you've had enough. I mean, there's the access to teachings, free teachings, whether it's on the TV, the radio, on the internet. There's so much there that you can look to for advice and support on those occasions where you can't get to the monastery or to the teacher. So I don't think it's a problem. It's very useful to have a daily meditation practice in the morning. Many people start off like meditating last thing at night, but usually you're quite tired by that time, and often get sleepy, and then start to get discouraged because get sleepy when you meditate. It's good just to calm the mind before sleeping, and meditating at night is good, but it's very useful for first thing in the morning to get up just a little bit earlier, because it's a quiet time, you don't have so much going on in your mind. And what's very important is that after that you can feel the effects of the meditation in the next few hours at least. And if you can be very observant of how the meditation period affects your sense of calm and patience and mindfulness during the day, that will give you real encouragement to keep up and do it every day. But during the day, also, if you can just have just short periods, like even like 1 minute or two, like when someone's on a computer or something, they get like tired and then they want some relaxation, and maybe their Line or their Facebook or something, just to relax for a few minutes, which is okay. But sometime if you just sit and just watch your breath for 60 seconds or 2 minutes, it's far more refreshing, and you can begin again and cut a long day up into short sessions where you have like a refreshment, a mindfulness refreshment from just a very short period of meditation. Doesn't need to be a long meditation in a quiet place, but just in front of your computer or just sitting down on a chair normally, just coming back and re-establishing your attention.
Ajahn Jayasaro, I just want to ask one more question. Normally, when we are very curious about the teachings of the Buddha, we tend to read a lot of books, listen to a lot of Dhamma talks by different kinds of teachers from different traditions. So, reading a lot of books and getting a lot of ideas, could that be in some way distracting when meditating?
Well, the very fact that you're asking this question suggests that you suspect it is. Yes, I think that we have to be clear of our intention when we read or listen to Dhamma. So it's one part of Dhamma practice, and we read and we listen, we study for information, for knowledge of the path and what's correct, incorrect, and also for encouragement and inspiration. So those are good, legitimate reasons for reading. But we should look at it as one spiritual practice, and be disciplined about when and for how long we read, because it can easily just become, another kind of distraction, rather than be with your mind and read something because you get immediate kind of sense of, uplift, and it feels good, and then that starts to replace the actual work of practice itself. Similarly, if you're not practicing at the same time, then the differences in idiom and language used by even teachers of the same tradition can be confusing if you don't have any kind of experiential basis to filter it or to understand it by. So I would say that once you, in the beginning, when you first start to practice Buddhism, let's say you're going to focus on Theravada Buddhism, then for the first year or two, then put aside, Hindu texts or even Tibetan texts and so on, and keep your reading to the Theravada tradition, at least for a while, because it's just too confusing otherwise. It's like trying to learn a number of different languages at once. After some years, even within the Theravada tradition, you've got this huge spectrum also. So spend some time reading different teachings, and then after a sufficient time, just choose one and then focus in on that. So, it's not like censoring and being very narrow-minded, but it's more like focusing down until you have something which is most supportive for the practice that you've adopted. When you're really confident in that and you really know your way around that, then you can go back to teachings from Tibetan Buddhism, from Mahayana tradition, from Zen, and even from other religious traditions, and you can integrate them with your practice if you wish to do that. But until you have that kind of confidence and fluency in this one particular practice, it can be more confusing than helpful.
กราบนมัสการท่านอาจารย์ชยสาโรค่ะ My name is น้ำพึ่ง I've been practicing meditation for certain extent of times already, but I have some confusion a little bit about walking and sitting meditations because my teacher she suggests me to start with the walking first for about 1 hour and then followed by the sitting meditations. Several times that I can do as being suggested, but sometimes when I get up late, I don't have enough time, so I just start with the sitting meditation right away, without walking first, and I try to get some feeling whether to compare whether is it better or not, or is it good enough to meditation by only sitting, or have to do both meditations, and because I think I'm still as a beginner of practicing, so but I would like to have your suggestion whether what would be the ideal practice. I should start by walking first every time and then followed by sitting, or it can be already just sitting right away. Thank you very much.
When we become students of a teacher and we take in monastic term we say we take dependence on them, or we have like a formal teacher-student relationship, then there's certain ethical responsibility to follow his advice or her advice. So I don't want to interfere in your relationship with your teacher if that's how he wants you to practice. But on a general level, I would say that there's no fixed need to walk first before sitting or sitting first before walking, and that you should just find which is most appropriate given the place in which you're living. Often you may well be in a place which is not possible to walk very much certain times of the day or night, and it seems to me unlikely that you would always be able to walk before you sit, or that it would be most helpful. So these are different ways of practicing. So in the sitting practice, we're learning how to be awake in stillness, and in the walking practice, we're learning how to be awake within movement. So these two things complement each other. If someone only sitting and only learns how to be awake while they're sitting and is still in a very kind of artificial environment, then they may have trouble outside of that particular posture and in maintaining mindfulness in daily life, for instance. But just walking, similarly, only developing that awareness within movement, it never goes as deep as the mindfulness sitting with your eyes closed. So some monks who do a lot of walking, when they become very peaceful, they maybe stand, or they have a seat by the side of their walking path, and they realize the mind wants to go more deeply, then they just sit down or stand. So the choice whether to walk or to sit can be influenced by many different factors. If you have some illness making it difficult to sit, then you can walk a lot more. If you have some problem preventing you from walking, then sit more. If you can't walk or sit, then practice laying down. You know, it's a matter of grasping the basic principle and then applying it in the best possible way given the circumstances you find yourselves in. So there's no fixed rule that you have to walk first before you sit that I'm familiar with.
So maybe the last question.
Yeah, okay. นมัสการพระอาจารย์ค่ะ I'm just gonna have a really short question. I have a friend and we have an issue together, and he said we can just. Why do we have to go to meditate in the meditation center? Why do we need Ajahn to actually guide us? Why can't we just stay at home and meditate?
Yes, you can.
That's the question.
Yeah, why not?
It's actually him. He asked me, and we have issue together. So he doesn't believe me. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm. Why not? Yeah, I mean, it's. If you actually do that, it's very hard for most people to be consistent when they're just relying on their own efforts and their own inspiration, and having that support and being able the opportunity to listen to and to meet people who've been practicing for a long time, I think is a valuable thing, and it's one of the benefits of living in a country like Thailand where you can do that. You know, when you say, well, is it really necessary? You know, that, I mean, necessary is a really interesting word, isn't it? What does necessary mean? You know, how do you define necessary? You wouldn't die if you didn't go, would you? I mean, so it's not necessary to your continued existence as a human being. But if we're looking in terms of growth in the Dhamma and growing in our understanding and our commitment to this practice, then meeting with others who have the same interests and values and goals, and listening to someone who's well practiced and has reflections that worthy sharing with others, seems like a good thing to do, better than going to a shopping mall or going to a restaurant or something.